News of a brutal murder is always shocking.
Cordon has gone up around the building. Police said their search was still going on.
He was maybe surprised at the amount of blood that produced.
We know that he's very manipulative and charming.
But when the crime is committed by a cop, it seems even more horrific.
Locals knew the couple had not been getting on, but no one expected anything as vicious as this.
Nobody wants to believe that police officers are criminals.
To die at the hands of the very people sworn to protect us is, for me, the ultimate betrayal of trust.
This man has brought shame on the Met.
He's got a very warped moral compass and probably has some sort of power trip, a lust for power.
In his mind, he probably thought, well, I'm a police officer, so I will get away with it.
In this series, I'm going to unravel the outlandish plots, lies and deceit of officers who attempt to get away with murder. Bobby Cutts Jr. was a charismatic, well-liked police officer in Canton, Ohio, in America's Midwest. Celebrated as the birthplace of America's National Football League, Canton, Ohio would soon become famous for an altogether more sinister reason. In June 2007, Bobby Cutts Jr.'s 26-year-old girlfriend, Jessie Davis, heavily pregnant with their child, disappeared, seemingly without a trace. The disappearance sparked a massive statewide search, which became national news. 10 days later, her lifeless body was found dumped in a state park in northeastern Ohio. I've brought together a crack team of experts who will help me unravel what happened in this disturbing case. Former Detective Superintendent Julie Mackay, Chartered Psychologist Serena Simmons, and former Met Homicide Detective Howard Groves. With the help of these experts, I'm going to try and piece together what happened to Jessie Davis. The first person I need to speak to is former Detective Superintendent Julie Mackay, to find out a bit more about Bobby Cutts Jr. and Jessie Davis's relationship.
Bobby Cutts Jr. was a serving officer in Ohio, and he was really well regarded, good at his job, liked by everybody. He was in a relationship with Jessie, and they already had a son together, little Blake, who was 2 years old. And at the time, Jessie was 9 months pregnant with their second child, and she knew it was going to be a girl, and she referred to her as Chloe.
But for all intents and purposes, good guy, liked, good at his job. So what happened in 2007? Why would a heavily pregnant Jessie suddenly disappear, leaving behind devastated boyfriend Bobby and her beloved 2-year-old son Blake?
We know that it was the 13th of June in 2007. Her mum was really close to her and had been trying to get hold of her during the course of the afternoon, and late at night rang again, but there was no reply to the phone call. The following morning, Mum goes round to the house to try and get hold of Jessie because she hadn't answered the phone. And actually, when she gets in, she's greeted by little Blake. And she says that she can smell him before she sees him because he's got a really dirty nappy on.
Jessie's mum, Patricia, realised that the awful state Blake was in meant he must have been trapped in the house alone for a long time.
She sees that some of the furniture's been knocked over. There's no sign of Jessie in that house.
She must have thought the worst. She knows that she'd never leave Blake on his own all night.
She's going through the house trying to find out where she is, calling out her name. So she can see that upstairs in the bedroom, it looks like the carpet's been cleaned, and there's a distinct smell of bleach.
The place looked ransacked.
Local journalist Laura Johnston grew up in this area. She was reporting on the case at the time and remembers how Jessie's mum Patricia's intuition meant she just knew something was very, very wrong.
And I believe she said at the time that her daughter was meticulous and that the house was always in really good order, that it was clean and neat, and it wasn't when she went over there. Jessie was a responsible insurance worker who showed up every day. Her colleagues said if she was a few minutes late, they were worried about her. Also, she was 9 months pregnant. Like, women don't just disappear when they're about to have a baby. So it was very mysterious, and it had deeply unsettling implications.
Howard Groves is a former Met Police detective, expert in these types of cases. I want to know at what point this went from a worried mother's intuition to a police investigation.
Jessie's mother got into the premises and found Blake, who was about 2 years of age at the time. He was in a distressed state.
As soon as kids are involved, it just kills me. Don't mess with innocence.
That would have set alarm bells ringing, so she contacted the police, and that is the point when the investigation started.
Sheriff Swanson's office, Jones. Can I help you? I don't know what's happening. He's gone in my... Hello? Yes. Can I help you? Yes, we need help.
What could have happened to Jessie that would make her leave her 2-year-old son home alone?
She's gone. Her car's here. Who's gone? My daughter.
It would be a missing person inquiry, so they would be looking to identify where she was. Was it somebody unknown to Jessie that turned up at the address and had attacked her?
Devastated and frantic, Jessie's mum Patricia was still trying to make sense of the situation. But then, as she started to clean up her distressed little grandson, he started talking.
He was mumbling, saying, Mummy crying. He makes mention that Mum was crying, so why was she crying?
Blake's toddler explanation wasn't clear, but he tried to tell his grandmother more details.
Mummy broke table. What does that mean? Does it mean she fell on the table and the table broke? And finally, Mummy in rug.
The baby's obviously seen everything. Blake's heartbreaking glimpse into the hours leading up to his mother's disappearance hinted that something terrible had happened. Patricia's only hope was that wherever her daughter was, she was still alive. So the police in Canton had a mystery on their hands. What had happened to the young mother? And could Jessie's police officer boyfriend galvanise his colleagues on the force to locate her and her unborn daughter safely? On the 15th of June 2007, heavily pregnant Jessie Davis was reported missing in the small city of Canton, Ohio. Her mother Patricia had realised something was wrong when she hadn't heard from Jessie at all the day before. When she arrived at her daughter's home, she discovered her 2-year-old grandson Blake home alone. Investigators at the scene noticed a strong smell of bleach in the house and signs of a struggle. Jessie's police officer boyfriend, Bobby Cutts Jr., was distraught, and there had been no trace of the missing woman in hours. Police's only clue of her last whereabouts came from CCTV showing Jessie out shopping with her son Blake on the 14th of June, the day before her mother reported her missing. Investigators were desperate to find their colleague's missing girlfriend and needed to piece together what had happened in the hours since she was last seen. Former crime scene investigator Alex Izzett can explain the clues that the forensics team would have been looking for.
any incident where someone is missing or there's something that's not quite right in the scenario and you go to a house and you smell bleach or any strong cleaning products, straight away there's going to be something that goes in the back of your mind, like, what's happened here? Why have you been using these products? What's going on?
Even when a crime scene has been bleached, forensic teams can find vital evidence for the investigation, and in this case, there was one particularly ominous clue.
So when we go to a scene, even though it might look beautifully clean, what we're looking at then is, well, what's missing? No one is cleaning a whole apartment from top to bottom in bleach. They're going to clean the place where the blood was. So then we're looking at, what's missing here? We can assume that something was here, something isn't here anymore. So what was it?
And that question could be answered by a very key witness, 2-year-old Blake. Blake had managed to tell his grandmother that his mum had been crying and then put in a rug. Police were starting to put together a theory of what may have happened to Jessie.
I believe in this incident that there was a struggle. I think the son said that Mummy hit the table, Mummy's in the rug, suggests that there was some kind of struggle and potentially she fell.
Police still needed to know more. The key could be finding that missing piece of evidence. I want to get a better sense of Jessie's life with her partner Bobby to see if there's any clues to what may have led to her disappearance.
She grew up slightly north of Canton in the Coventry Township, Portage Lakes area of Akron, and that's where her family lived, and she was a member of the church. They were very devout. Jessie and Bobby met at a bar. I mean, it seems like a pretty normal story. Bobby Cutts Jr. is from Canton. He graduated in 1995 and went to Walsh University for a couple of years. He played football there, but he left from there and decided to become a police officer eventually. I just remember at the time people talking about Bobby's magnetism. He was this very popular football player in high school.
They seemed like the perfect all-American couple. But Bobby and Jessie's relationship wasn't quite as perfect as it seemed.
He was seeing a lot of women at one time. I don't know how many knew of each other or what he was trying to juggle, but he had a way with women.
But with one child and another on the way with Jessie, and 2 other children from previous relationships, Bobby was having to work hard to pay the bills. And behind the scenes, there was inevitably tension.
When a woman goes missing, your first thought is, well, where's the guy?
When Jessie's mum Patricia had initially called 911 on the 15th of June, Bobby Cutts Jr. had been working his shift as usual at the Canton Police Department.
They would have asked certain questions of him when the last time he saw her, all the things that you would expect to be asked. So he probably was feeling some degree of pressure.
The pair didn't live together, and so as well as the investigation happening at Jessie's house, the detectives also searched Bobby's home, but they didn't find anything to suggest he was involved. Police were clear that fellow officer Cutts Jr. was not a suspect in Jessie's disappearance. And Bobby, a serving police officer, appeared eager to use his skills and experience to do whatever he could to help in the search for Jessie. He did several media interviews at the time, trying to raise awareness of her disappearance and appealing for assistance in finding her.
I think the national media coverage is great if it's focused all in the right direction. I mean,
do you believe Jessie will be found alive?
Hopefully she'll be found alive.
So when the search started for Jessie, am I right in thinking that Bobby Cutts Jr. went out on the search with them?
Yeah.
In your experience in the force, have you ever been trained to watch out for the people who help?
I've not been trained per se, but it is something as an investigator. You are aware that that's a possibility, and a lot of suspects return to the scene. That's not uncommon. So what the local police did in consultation with the community was they decided to go and actually search a particular area to try and see if they could find her.
And the people of Ohio turned out in their thousands to help.
You know, I anticipated a big crowd. I don't know if I anticipated this big a crowd the first day on the, on the actual big search. So it's heartwarming. You know, it lets me know how much this community cares. And I've said this before, there's a lot of strength in numbers. We've got a lot of numbers here. We're going to be able to cover a lot of ground.
But that area was quite vast, and that created its own problems for the searchers, because you would have people who would be coming along wanting to help, and the police officers would then have to be managing the amount of people who wanted to help them find her.
First, I want to thank everybody for coming out. I can't describe the feeling of looking out and seeing all these faces out here. It means a lot to have all these people out here to help us look for Jessie.
Everybody turned out to help look for her. She's one of ours. She's the girl next door. We need to all come out and help. The scrutiny from the media was intense. I mean, every Northeast Ohio news outlet was there. There were national TV stations. The cable news was there. There were trucks all over. This neighborhood that doesn't even have sidewalks, shooting at her duplex, trying to share this story. Thousands of people had been coming out, combing the area. They had golf carts and dogs and I think horses, and people were walking hand in hand so they didn't miss anything on the ground, looking for tire tracks or anything. And they didn't find anything. Nobody knew what happened, and the goal was just to find her. Bobby Cutts was searching. He was talking to the media saying, "This has been hell for me. Usually I'm a jokey person, and this is just so hard for me."
Jessie's family and Bobby were struggling without answers, but they pushed on, doing all they could to help police in their search.
Any time at all that you could donate to come out and help look for would be greatly appreciated. We feel very confident that they're going to help us find Jessie, hopefully bring her back safe.
But after 9 full days of searching by Bobby, Jessie's family, and thousands of volunteers, there was still no sign of the heavily pregnant Jessie. Then, on the 24th of June 2007, Bobby Cutts Jr. went to meet with FBI agents. Bobby wanted to explain that in previous interviews, he hadn't been entirely truthful. That meeting would turn the whole investigation on its head and confirmed Jessie's family's worst fears.
He went with his solicitor to the FBI and explained to them that he was involved in her disappearance and her death.
Bobby was immediately arrested. His act of devoted boyfriend and upstanding police officer had fooled the media and the local community. But it had all been a lie. For the moment, Bobby's admission would be kept secret from the public. Police still needed to be sure he was telling the truth before they gave up the search for Jessie. And for that, they needed to know more details. Would Bobby Cutts Jr. now tell the truth and give investigators and Jessie's devastated family the answers they needed? On the 24th of June 2007, Bobby Cutts Jr., a serving police officer, admitted to FBI officers that he had been involved in the disappearance of his girlfriend, Jessie Davis, the mother of his 2-year-old son Blake and his unborn daughter Chloe. Bobby had masqueraded as a worried boyfriend and dutiful police officer, helping in a massive statewide search for his missing girlfriend, all along knowing that 26-year-old Jessie was already dead, and her body lay hidden in a wooded area outside the town.
I think every day that goes by in a public search like that, you expect less that they're going to be found alive. And I think there was more sadness.
What kind of person would join a search party, pretending they hoped to find Jessie alive and well, when they knew exactly where her body was hidden. Serena Simmons, an expert in forensic psychology, has a theory.
Well, the first thing that's fascinating to me with this particular aspect of the case is I think the police did think he was a suspect because they would have gone straight to the partner being a suspect. So I think they were probably playing a bit of a game there and getting him to divulge as much information as he could early on in the case to see where he led them, to see what he said. The other thing is there's a little bit of hero worship involved here. So if he led them near enough to the site and they found her, he's the hero. He helped find the body.
And also, would he be able to say, well, if I'd have done it, I wouldn't have led you here, would I? I'd have led you away from the area. Is he thinking ahead like that already?
I think you're right, yeah. There's definitely that, again, that ego. Yeah, exactly right.
Ultimately, although Bobby's disclosure did mean that investigators were one step closer to finding Jessie's body, some would later question whether its timing wasn't just a bit too calculated and convenient.
There was always a possibility because he probably was privy to some of the inquiries that the police were doing and people that the investigating officers may have spoken to. So he may have felt, even though he wasn't a suspect per se, that there was things that were happening in the background that would ultimately lead back to him. I think he probably took the view, if I say, I'll take you to where it is, but it was an accident, there was every chance that he probably would have gotten off at that point.
9 days after she goes missing, Bobby Cutts led investigators to Hampton Hills Metro Park. It's part of the Summit County Metro Park system, and it's within the Cuyahoga Valley National Park, which is not a park with playgrounds and picnic areas. This is a wild, natural park. Northeast Ohio in June is usually pretty sunny and hot or warm, cool in the 60s at night, up to 90 during the day. We have a lot of humidity. It's your typical like American summer. Like this is warm weather season.
By the time Bobby had confessed to at least some details of his crime, Jessie's body had been exposed to the extremes of an Ohio summer for over a week. Was Bobby using his experience of forensics to manipulate the investigation into Jessie's death?
Based on the time that Jessie's remains were left in the open, it had decomposed to such a state that they wouldn't have been able to identify how she had been killed.
But when the officers recovered Jessie's remains, they did find that little Blake had been right. His mother's lifeless body had been wrapped in a rug, a missing comforter from the bedroom in her home.
If you just imagine for a child that's 2 years of age to have experienced that, that would have been so distressing.
Unbelievable.
A police officer, someone who's trusted, someone who's expected to work to certain standards.
Despite admitting to being responsible for Jessie Davis's death and hiding the body, Bobby Cutts Jr. claimed he hadn't intended to kill her. He claimed they had a heated argument where she flew at him and they'd struggled, during which he had accidentally struck her in the throat, killing her outright. He had then panicked and hidden her body in the heavily wooded state park, whilst he tried desperately to work out what to do next.
That tends to be the modus operandi that a lot of people will go by. It's when they're involved in cases like that is, I didn't mean to do whatever, it was an accident. And then I panicked and I disposed of the remains. That is normally the tack that is taken. But police officers are very much aware of these excuses that are sometimes used.
I can't comprehend how, even if he says it was an accident, why is he putting his hands on a heavily pregnant woman? It's just unforgivable for me.
Sometimes you have to ask yourself that question, what drives people to do those things? Is it a fit of pique? You can't excuse that type of behavior, whichever way you want to cut it.
A lot of people, even if they're in violent relationships, would draw the line at killing their partner who was pregnant. But Cutts overstepped this line, so we have to wonder why. It could be that it was an impulsive act at the time and he just lost control in the context of an argument. Or possibly he felt a certain pressure and it was just too much for him to handle. And in his mind, it made more sense to just kill his victim rather than have to face up to his responsibilities.
I can't get my head around how a serving police officer could lose control like that and be involved in the death of his children's mum. Psychologist Serena Simmons has some revealing insights into his background and character. Bobby Cutts Jr., what do we know he was like as a person?
He was married quite early on and he was quite young. He had several different children by several different women over a period of years. He was very quick to kind of push a partner aside while already grooming someone else and kind of starting a relationship with them. We know that actually that Jessie was one of essentially his mistresses to start with. I think with this particular case, you can see he's the kind of guy that needs to be adored. He needs a lot of energy from women. And I think for him, there's something about the thrill of the chase.
Bobby had begun dating Jessie whilst he was still married. With 3 children by 3 different women, and now a 4th on the way, all whilst he was still married. It turns out he's had years of practice manipulating and deceiving people. Even as a police officer, his record was not nearly as spotless as the media had first made out. He'd had periods of erratic behaviour and acute unreliability. At one point, his gun had ended up in the possession of a notorious local drugs dealer and crime boss. Now, his ability to lie to everyone around him about Jessie's death makes much more sense. What sort of a person does that? Is it a certain person that does that?
There was never any sense that you get from his history that he wanted to settle down in any way. I don't think he wanted to have children, because that would mean being potentially more committed or embedded in that relationship, and he clearly didn't want that. But the other interesting thing from a psychological point of view is it takes, quite a lot of creativity to maintain that kind of lifestyle. So he would have been lying to everyone to kind of maintain that kind of lifestyle of having those relationships going at the same time. So that takes quite some effort as well.
And as the lies and deception mounted, Cutts Jr.'s behaviour became ever darker and more unpredictable.
There are several previous partners that do report that he was extremely abusive and also sadly really abusive towards his children as well.
No, not the kids. During ongoing custody disputes, previous partners have requested Bobby Cutts' access rights to be restricted due to allegations of mental and physical abuse. After the act of murdering Jessie, he left the child alone all night. I mean, that in itself is a different mindset, because if whatever happens, he just left the child alone for over 24 hours.
Yeah, we have to remember that this is a man that doesn't care.
I don't know what it is, but as soon as kids get involved, it's innocence. It's innocence. Any kind of innocence. I've got an overwhelming sense of trying to protect. And I suppose as a police officer, that's what you're supposed to do, is protect people, especially children.
Yeah, and the irony, again, doesn't escape us, does it? So he would have had a role where he was, in a protective role. He was protecting the vulnerable, and yet he chooses people who are vulnerable.
This is really grim stuff, an absolute tragedy. But the mystery was about to get deeper. Not only was Cutts now charged with murder, but the police were realising that someone else was involved.
They needed to understand if his confession was the truth or not. It's really important. Just because somebody confesses and says, yeah, I killed them and I've got rid of the body, I mean, how do you know that's the case? How do you know that's the truth? And also, how do you know they're not going to change their story at court later on? So your job early on is to make sure that A, you verify that account, and B, you discount anything else that it could have been. So as the police are trying to verify his confession and understand his account, a school friend of his, Myisha Ferrell, comes forward, and she's got some really significant information. So she goes on to tell the police that Bobby had contacted her, and she was really, really shocked when he picks her up in the truck.
When she looked in the back of the truck, Myisha caught a glimpse of something. A rug or comforter in which a large object was clearly being hidden.
And there in the back, wrapped up, is the body of Jessie.
Bobby Cutts Jr., a serving officer in Canton, Ohio police force, had joined the massive search for his missing girlfriend, 26-year-old Jessie Davis, who was heavily pregnant with the couple's second child at the time of her disappearance. After 9 days of searching, however, Bobby came clean. He took the police to a wooded area of Hampton Hills Park in the neighbouring county, where he had hidden Jessie's body and confessed to his involvement in her death, claiming it had been an accident and then he'd panicked. But why would a police officer entrusted with public protection murder the mother of his own children?
This is not an ideal situation for anyone involved. There are multiple children of Bobby Cutts with different women. He was under financial stress to try to provide for those kids, and there'd been complaints of domestic violence in the past with previous girlfriends. So none of his relationships seemed storybook.
Clearly, he's under a lot of pressure. He's got these multiple relationships. He has to keep them secret from his various partners. So I imagine this must have been playing on his mind to a degree in the background. But what's quite interesting is he seemed very adept at being able to push it all away and continue with his immoral behaviour.
Police still needed to know what happened to Jessie, but since Bobby had waited 9 days to help them find her, and her body was badly decomposed by the time they recovered it, their investigation was severely hampered.
The US is vast. There's huge areas where people just don't go, and they wouldn't go there. And these areas are filled with nature and animals that need to eat and will graze on anything, that, especially something that's decomposing. So I would assume that not necessarily that you're putting a body out to potentially get found, you're putting a body out to quickly take the interest of nature and possibly decompose faster and possibly get eaten. Bodies will bloat as all the gases are starting to release, and they will disform and disfigure, and then the body starts to break apart. And it can speed up, definitely in certain climates, especially in this case.
Sadly, this meant that forensics had very little to go on, with investigators even needing to rely on dental records to identify for certain that the remains belonged to Jessie Davis. They were, however, able to make one crucial finding.
When Jessie's body was found and the autopsy went ahead, they couldn't figure out exactly how she died, but they noticed that there was still the baby in her womb.
The baby could have lived. If something happened with Jessie and she was dying, you could have had a C-section on her and saved the baby's life. That's how close to being born the baby was.
Forensics were able to confirm the devastating news that the couple's unborn daughter, already named Chloe, had also been murdered in Bobby's attack. It was this, and not Jessie's death, which would make Bobby Cutts Jr. eligible for the death penalty under Ohio state law. But police still had to figure out exactly what had happened that night. And the only thing they had to go on was the information 2-year-old Blake had given them at the beginning of the case, and Bobby's own version of events. That Jessie had initiated the struggle, grabbing him first to prevent him from leaving the home, and he had accidentally elbowed her in the throat, causing her to choke to death.
Bobby then gave a story that he had been involved in a fight with Jessie, but she'd fallen over, and that's why she received her injuries. He was asked questions about calling 911. He tried to give the excuse that he couldn't.
Kutz said he'd attempted to use his training to help Jessie, attempting CPR and trying to find rubbing alcohol to use as smelling salts to revive her. And he claimed the bleached carpet in the bedroom was due to him accidentally knocking it over as he attempted to help Jessie, rather than a cleanup operation. But was he telling the truth? A breakthrough would come for police in this investigation when a new witness appeared.
Myisha Ferrell is a friend of Bobby Kutz, and she knew him in high school, probably knew of that persona, and obviously he had a way with women. He had multiple affairs with multiple women, so I can only guess that if he called a woman and said, hey, can you help me, and they had this idea that he was Bobby Kutz's superstar, that you would go. Obviously, he thought he needed help, and he probably wasn't gonna turn to any of his police officer buddies to do that. And he wanted someone he didn't think was going to go to the authorities.
"30-year-old Myisha Farrell, an old school friend of Bobby's, said she had been surprised when Bobby arrived at her home on the night of the 14th of June 2007, as he usually would call ahead. But she was even more surprised when Bobby revealed to her the events of that night. And her evidence would assist the prosecution in their case against Bobby.
Sometimes people are more valuable to a prosecution case as a witness than perhaps if you charge them as an offender for assisting an offender in this case. They'll get a minimal sentence and they might not tell the jury what's happened, whereas her evidence about what's actually gone on is pretty damning for him.
Despite Bobby's story that he had accidentally elbowed Jessie, Myisha Farrell suspected differently.
She gave evidence to the officers that he had spoken to her about what had happened, and that when he was talking to her, he gave a strangling motion, which would have indicated that he'd actually strangled Jessie.
The court also heard that Kutz had called Jessie's phone that night after picking up Myisha in the truck that already contained Jessie's body. This led prosecutors to conclude Kutz was attempting to construct an alibi, even at those early stages. Importantly though, it also showed that Bobby's original story that he couldn't call for help was a lie.
It transpired that he had another phone in his vehicle. He always traveled with 2 phones.
He had killed Jessie and then failed to call for the vital emergency care that could have saved her and their unborn child. The court also heard that there had been red flags about Bobby's behaviour in the run-up to Jessie's death.
So he was going out drinking, he was phoning his ex-wife to try and reconciliate their relationship. He even went to see his other secret girlfriend.
Bobby had spoken to a friend of his and kind of made mention of, I'm going to kill her, I'm going to bury her somewhere. You have to ask yourself those questions. What caused him to make that comment to her in the first place?
Prosecutors believed that Kutz, already a father of 3, was feeling too much pressure. And on the night in question, he simply snapped, causing him to kill both Jessie and the couple's unborn daughter, Chloe. But Bobby continued to claim that Jessie had died in an accident. He pleaded not guilty. After 21 hours of deliberation, the jury of 12 found Bobby Kutz Jr. guilty of both the murder of Jessie Davis and their unborn child. He was also found guilty of 2 counts of gross abuse of a corpse and an additional conviction of child endangerment for leaving 2-year-old Blake home alone for over 24 hours.
I think he was lucky, to be honest. He gets sentenced to 57 years in prison.
57 years. Even though Myisha Farrell became a star witness, she had still played a part in the disposal of Jessie Davis's body. She was convicted of obstructing justice and complicity to gross abuse of a corpse, and was sentenced to 2 years in prison.
I think the prosecutors never probably felt like she was a threat. I think she was a pawn in this scheme.
Justice had been served, but for Jessie's family, life would never be the same again.
I think the community really felt for Blake. He was this poor 2-year-old who had been subjected to horrible trauma, and now he didn't have his mom. He should be graduating from high school. Now, obviously, his dad is still in prison, so he's had to grow up without a mother and a father. He's been raised by his grandmother. You have to imagine that this trauma obviously it's changed his life.
For Bobby Cutts Jr., overwhelmed by a pressure to provide, he had made the worst possible decision. But as a police officer, used to making decisions under pressure, on that night in 2007, he betrayed his oath to protect people and took what he thought was the easy way out, killing his girlfriend.
He made a decision to get rid of Jessie, get rid of her body. He knew that he needed to ring the police. He's killed somebody. He could have rung her family and perhaps got them to come and get some help from them. He certainly shouldn't have left little Blake on his own all night. That was terrible.
Horrendous.
Really terrible. And then, of course, he's got somebody else involved, hasn't he? He's got Myisha to come and give him a hand to help him get rid of the body as well. So he would have known that every single one of those actions was wrong, and yet he still did them.
The fact that he is a police officer who is sworn to uphold the law, and then he's the one who killed her, I mean, that just makes it worse. Obviously, so much worse.
This really is a sad story. I mean, despite the guilty verdict, this case is still shrouded in mystery. Only one person knows why Jessie Davis died that night in 2007, and he's serving 57 years in prison for murder. Maybe one day Bobby Cutts Jr. will tell the truth. Who knows?